Hey everyone, I'm back with some more Fire Emblem Engage propaganda, and today we're discussing two units, not just one, but two, Alcryst and Etie, because I think both of these units are really interesting, and a lot of people think one of them is better, and some people think the other one might be better. Some people think they're both bad, some people think they're both good, and I thought it'd be interesting to dive into how good these units actually are, and how good some of their builds are, because there's quite a few conceptions about them that might be misconceptions, and I thought it'd be interesting to discuss. So joining me once again for some Engage expertise is Septi. Hello Septi, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. I'm here again.
Of course, I made another tweet about, which one do you think is better and why, and a lot of people posted their opinions, and some of these opinions will come by in just a second. I also ran a poll on my YouTube channel. 5,000 people voted in it, and 74% of them think Alcryst is better, which I think is pretty good representation of what the fan base at large thinks between these two. Like, almost everyone thinks Alcryst is better, and until shortly, that was me too. I was a big Etie fan when I played my first playthrough on hard mode, and I just didn't use Alcryst other than like a couple chapters as a filler. But I always got the idea from everyone online that, yeah, Alcryst is obviously better. I used Etie a lot, but that's just kind of what happens with Link units, just kind of snowball thanks to Speed Taker. So Etie was very good for me, but if I were to be objective and rank her among other characters, I don't think she'd be better than Aaliyah. I think she goes into C usable tier. She's fun. Alcryst is a unit that I've seen a lot of people praise. I haven't ever tried him myself beyond the first couple chapters, but I know he's really good at what he does, which apparently is just being an archer. I just think Luna is a standout trait, so I'm going to base most of my ratings based on that. But, just having access to bows is pretty nice as well. Probably has a lot of the same pros that Etie did for me. Like, you could probably make him a warrior and be pretty good with that too. I'm going to throw him... He's above Diamond for sure, and I reckon he might even be A. Yeah, he could be. I could see him in A. I don't know if he's better than Hortensia or Runaka. Now, I'm like, hold up, maybe Etie is better. And I think that most people that I think are really good at this game think Etie is better. And I was curious, Septi, do you have an idea why there's such a discrepancy between what I think you and a couple of other people think versus what the player base at large thinks between these two? Because I believe you think Etie is slightly better, right?
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion that Etie is better than Alcryst. I don't think it's like a huge difference, and they're both not very good, but I do think Etie is the better of the two. I think it mostly comes from just first impressions again. First impressions do a lot for what people think about a unit, because once you see something that works, you know it works, and most people are just going to stick to that. And Etie's first impression in the couple starting chapters isn't great, whereas Alcryst makes a really strong first impression in Brodia. So I think it leads a lot of people to just assume he's better, and so you use the better one, and then it's sort of this confirmation bias because you found something that works. Even though I don't think it is necessarily true that Alcryst is the better one as the game goes on.
I definitely do agree. I think it's really funny that you bring up first impressions, because that's what kind of got me hooked on both of them. This is one of the very few games where an archer makes a really good first impression in both cases, because both Etie and Alcryst get a pretty above average amount of Pegasus Knights to shoot down right away. And I think Etie is like close to one-shotting, while Alcryst is one-shotting with the steel bow for both. At least that's what I remember on hard mode. So that probably helps them both a lot. It's like very different from if it's from Rebecca, who like shoots a Pegasus Knight and then you still need Lowen to come in and finish it off, right?
Just the terror early game archers that GBA gives you that like can't even kill flyers. And this game does have a lot of flying enemies, so it certainly helps. Etie has a tendency to just sort of die if she's left in range. And also in Chapter 4, she is exactly 3 points short of one-shotting the flyers on Matinee, whereas she one-shots them in the prior chapter when she first joins.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, yeah, a lot of people see, oh, Etie can't one-shot flyers anymore, and they think she's starting to fail in that role. And then Alcryst shows up holding a steel bow, and even though he probably doesn't actually have any more strength than your Etie does at that point, because he's holding the steel bow, it just gives him a really good first impression because the steel bow itself is so good.
All right. We'll get more into this probably as we're going along, but let's go through some tweets. I collected some from both sides on Twitter, and even some neutral ones. This is not representative of what I'm about to show because, like I said, most people believe that Alcryst is better. So the balance that you see here is not actually present in real time, as it were. But let me read out a couple anyway. So we'll start with the ones that think Etie is better, you know, the rare ones. So this one, I blurred the names again. Etie for more consistent and reliable damage dealing, Alcryst for gambling. Both are about the same though, so it really comes down to preference, but Etie for me. Etie, more consistent. Warrior is better than Alcryst promotion, we better remember this one. Doesn't rely on a random Luna proc, uses an axe pretty well. I like Etie just because she's a bit more consistent. I often find myself on the unlucky side of the Luna coin flip, and when I need to trigger, it never does. And then it activates when I need it not to. Relying on it leaves a sour taste. Etie, I always know what I'm going to get. And then this one. Alcryst on average misses thresholds to one-shot flyers, whereas Etie does with her higher strength. Luna is great, but at the end of the day it is still a % proc chance. Etie also just has more availability, which is more important for the early game flyers. This one, Etie, because Alcryst needs Lunacryst to be helpful, and I also gave Etie the Emblem Lin, so she was doubling everything by the end game. And this is one of my favorites. Alcryst is bottom 5 in the game. Etie is slightly better in my opinion, so maybe bottom 6 or 7. I don't know what they think. So that's the Etie side, represented on Twitter. Again, the more rare ones. And I have some for Alcryst, and you know, you probably know what's coming here. I love Etie and all other girl boss archers in this series, but even I know Alcryst is better due to better bases and class skill. Sometimes just doing big damage and Etie is too frail. Granted, I have never used Alcryst long term, so it might be inconsistent. Both good enough before Solm to kill flyers with a steel bow. Long term I prefer Alcryst, basically just because he starts ready for promotion. I don't really like either much for long term. Usually I use other options for my late game bow needs. Here's one bringing up Fogado, who we should probably talk about at some point later. Once you get Fogado, Etie is essentially useless, but Alcryst kinda always remains relevant due to Luna and his high dexterity. Here we have, in my opinion, Etie is just kind of outclassed as an archer. Alcryst has a higher starting level and better bases as well as Luna. Etie is still useful for early game flyers, and I haven't messed with reclassing her, since I usually drop her for Alcryst, but she's better in my experience. Not sure what they think now. Okay, whatever. Alcryst, ready for promotion, comes with Luna. I can fix him, and a double feature here. Alcryst, like by a mile, mainly his dex skill to be honest, but overall his growths are just better, except for strength. So the general trend is that people who like Etie say, okay, Etie is more consistent, she doesn't rely on Luna, or people who like Alcryst just think he's better because, very roughly paraphrasing, it's like better Etie and you also get Luna. I have some neutral ones here too. After trying both, my experience is that Alcryst is a lottery unit who's really fun when he works, but isn't reliable enough to be amazing, and Etie just struggles later on in maddening. All in all, I don't really think that either one is great without higher investments. We have one about Fogado again. Both kind of just exist to me, not gonna lie. They're fine early on as they're archers that do their jobs well enough, but the moment I get to Solm, I just resort to using Fogado, especially once I get access to the Radiant Bow and Erica. And last one, my favorite by far, you're better than this, Mecha. Come on. You're not wrong, by the way. So, the general trend, like I said, is that Alcryst's main advantage, or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, is Luna. Now, the way I've always looked at Luna is, if you're not two-shotting an enemy, or not one-rounding, then Luna can help you one-round. And if you're up against a unit that is not one-rounding, then Luna unit is better. But if you're up against a unit that is one-rounding, then you're inconsistent, because, you know, you're relying on Luna rather than just one-rounding straight up. So which of these two comparisons is going on here?
Yeah, so I think it's because of the sheer amount of flexibility you have in what you actually send your units to do. It's absolutely true that, like, Etie is a unit who can one round and will run round, whereas Alcryst will sometimes need to fall back on Luna in order to get those one rounds. And so it's just better late game to have the more reliable option from Etie.
I think you said last time during Alcryst discussion that Etie is, roughly quoting here, one of the few units in this game who makes physical combat work, which kind of implies that it's harder to make physical units work than magical units. Why is that, and why does Etie make it work? Is it just high strength?
Yeah, so obviously if you want to do physical combat, you need strength. That's the most important stat for it. I know a lot of people will say, like, oh yeah, speed's the most important stat. And maybe that's true, but at the end of the day, you can always pull out more speed. You can switch to using Lin. You can inherit speed boosting skills. You can get a rally speed. If you don't have the strength to actually kill, once you reach the doubling threshold, all that speed doesn't really do anything for you. And there's so much access to speed that you can get Etie doubling. So she's one of the few units who will consistently kill things when she does double. Looking strictly at averages, her strength is roughly like the third highest in the game.
And then I gotta wonder though, because I've always felt like when playing Fire Emblem that it's might that is easier to stack because you have forges, and in this game you have engraves, and you can rally speed, but you can also rally strength. You can do a Lin emblem to get more speed, but you could also use an Erica emblem to get more power with, I don't know, Sieglinde or whatever. Or you can inherit, like, I don't know, Gentility or something. So, doesn't that hold true for both strength and speed?
Sort of. And it is true that you can stack both, and you'll need to stack both. But at the end of the day, once you meet a specific speed threshold to double, you're good. The difference with strength is that that threshold is going to be a lot higher because enemies in this game get very bulky on the physical side. And so in order to one-round them, getting to the doubling threshold, even though you have just as many resources, is a lot easier than it is getting to the kill threshold.
Does it kind of depend on the enemy? Like, can you always reliably double enemy swordmasters, and do you then always come up short on, I don't know, just thinking at the top of my head, to it killing generals or something? Like, isn't there always a higher threshold to reach potentially?
So there is for sure. But then there's no ring quite like Lin for strength. So engage forces you to, you can only stack more than 20, you can't stack more than 20 points in a given stat at once. Lin just pretty much immediately rams that 20 speed cap, and there's no emblem like that for strength. Like Roy on characters with 9. And so you can get a lot more speed Lin than you can any other stat out of another ring.
Okay. Speaking of Lin, I probably should get this out of the way. A lot of people just assume that both of these units just use Lin to get to doubling thresholds, I assume, and use like Astral Storm. That's pretty interesting for both, especially if they're going for covert classes. What are actually their best builds? Because I've always assumed for Etie that it's just Warrior and put Lin on it. It's a pretty basic combo that most units can do. But Alcryst, you know, he has his own tier elite class, or however you pronounce it, but he could also go Warrior Lin. He could do the same thing. So what would be best for either of them, and how does it factor into their comparison?
Yeah, for Etie, I think for most chapters, it's obviously that, oh yeah, just go Warrior, go Lin. It's super simple, but it works really well, because, as I said before, Lin gives you so much speed, you're guaranteed to double, and from there, you just want to go the highest strength class with the best weapons, which is Warrior. You can do other stuff. I was planning a run earlier, which involved actually Swordmaster Etie for one chapter, just so that she could Lodestar Rush a boss. But point is, regardless, that Warrior is better in 90% of cases. For Alcryst, on the other hand, I kind of see the appeal of Warrior on him. It does have overall better strength. Like we said, speed's easy to fix, strength not quite so much, especially if you're Alcryst, who has very bad strength. But like you said before, if you're not one-rounding either way, you might as well have Luna to push you over the edge. Yeah, I'd rather an Alcryst that sometimes kills than one that like sometimes does a third of their, or that always does a third of their HP but never kills. So I think Alcryst, you might as well just stick to Teodelete. I don't know how you pronounce it. Go for Luna, but I don't think Luna is at all the best thing you can be doing.
Yeah, probably not. I can see that. Didn't you at one point like compile like all the defenses of every enemy in the game to see just how good Luna potentially is on average?
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet that has the stats for every single enemy in the game. On average, starting from about halfway through the soul mark, because that's probably when you'd learn Luna, the average result of Luna is 12 extra damage, which is hilarious to me, because if you want to do something real quick, open up Oife and ask Oife to compare a 10 and 20 Teodelete Alcryst to a 10 and 20 Warrior Etie.
10 and 20 is what you said, right?
It's very... Yeah, 10 and 20 for both. The result is going to come up that there is an 11 to 12 strength difference between them, which just so happens to be the average damage that Alcryst gets on Luna.
So what you're saying is, if you activate... Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so if you activate, just like you were going to say, if you activate Luna, Alcryst is not doing extra damage, he is replicating Etie's damage.
So basically the people who saying Etie is more consistent, whereas Alcryst needs Luna to do the same thing, they're basically right, assuming these benchmarks, of course.
Yeah. So the difference then is that Alcryst gets more damage against enemies that are bulkier on average, and Etie gets even more damage against enemies that are frailer on average, since Alcryst is dependent on the enemy's defense stat to get his damage. The issue there is that, like, think about what the bulky enemies are, right? They're like paladins and generals, and wyverns, all of which have an effective damage weakness that Etie can exploit.
Yeah, true. I was just realizing, wait, Manikati is there? Wait, I mean, I don't know if they're good enough against generals to really use against them, but against wyverns and paladins, for sure. Like, they probably don't want one-on generals with the Manikati, right?
Not with the Manikati, but you can forge her a hammer. She still has axe access in Warrior.
Oh, true. True enough. I rarely found myself using axes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little awkward to use axes because bows are just so much more convenient. But it is a way that she has to match even Alcryst Luna procs against bulkier enemies. So Etie has ways to consistently and always do either enough damage to one round or more damage than Alcryst, whereas Alcryst keeps having to depend on this, like some of the people in the tweets brought up, this coin flip skill that you can't always get.
Yeah, true. I do gotta bring this up because I think some people brought it up in the comments. Obviously, Etie is a little more frail. You said that yourself. I feel like that matters less for archers than for other units because they don't face counterattacks that much. They don't really have to be in combat. So I think if that is what Etie loses out on compared to Alcryst's offense, that doesn't really matter, right? Like, we don't really care about their bulk, generally speaking.
Yeah, totally agree there. It is absolutely true that Etie does give you a little less room for error. If Alcryst is in range of an enemy, he'll just get hit and he'll shrug it off. If Etie is in range of an enemy, she'll probably die. The difference is that if either one of them is in range of an enemy, something has already gone wrong. And I don't know how valuable it is to rate units in a context where we're already assuming something has gone wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a fair advantage for Alcryst, but a small one because, like, all the other advantages just seem more important, such as offense, consistency, flexibility. You know, their bulk doesn't really come into play. I guess sometimes they counter at 2 range, sometimes in like rare occasions, but I feel like in Engage that's like especially rare.
Yeah, Engage has a couple places where you can do it, but the thing, if you're on a large number of enemy, no matter who you're using, you're probably going to use some effect that renders their bulk obsolete. Give them Ike for that chapter, so that they're bulky regardless. You might put them under Bonded Shield, or, you know, there are so many things you can do to just render a unit's bulk obsolete that it sort of makes those incidental places where Alcryst might be able to enemy phase a little better irrelevant, because you could just make Etie do it instead, and then she would kill without needing Luna.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the bigger disadvantage that Etie has, or like the more important one to address for them, is I think someone brought up accuracy at some point, that Etie like misses a lot for them. Do you think there's a significant difference in their accuracy because Alcryst has more dexterity?
So yeah, people have brought up the larger dex a lot. I think people tend to overvalue what dexterity does. It's super easy to look at Alcryst and say, oh, he has 30 dex. That means he's getting plus 60 hit. But he's not getting plus 60 hit over Etie. He's only getting the difference between their dexterity at that point, which he has roughly 13 more dex when they're both 10 and 20. So that's an extra, depending on how far you've gone, like 25, 26 hit around that point, which sounds like a lot of hit.
That does sound like a lot.
As far as ways to adjust your hit in Engage goes, it's actually pretty small. Like the Lin engraving, for example, gives a 40-point hit swing. Alcryst is looking at around 30 dex, assuming he's using an 85 hit silver bow. That's 60 hit from his dexterity on top of the silver bow's 85 hit. for 145 total hit. But like, assuming you're targeting like a Griffin Knight or something, those usually float around 70 avoid. So Alcryst will still have imperfect hit on them. Of course, Etie will have even less until we give them the Lin engraving. Once we give them the Lin engraving, they both just have perfect hit. So technically, Alcryst has better hit with unengraved weapons, but why are we using unengraved weapons when we have, you know, a bunch of engravings to distribute to our weapons freely?
Yeah, no, you absolutely should be using your engraves because they're kind of free. And I found in Engage it's kind of rare that I want to switch to different weapons. Usually you have like one weapon that's generally so good you don't have to switch off of it a whole lot besides maybe switching up effectiveness. So the only thing I will bring up as a devil's advocate's point is that the Lin engrave might not be this might not be the only unit that wants to use the Lin engrave.
That's true. There are other hit-boosting engraves, though the Lin engrave is the most potent. Like we said before, Etie probably won't be enemy-facing much, so there's also the Erica engraving, which gives a ton of hit at the cost of crit avoid, but that doesn't matter if you don't plan on taking hits. So there are other hit engravings, but yeah, Etie generally is a little more resource-intensive. She's more dependent on Lin as an emblem than Alcryst is, and she is more dependent on engraved weapons. That said, it's not like Alcryst performs very well without those things anyways.
Yeah, because is his speed good enough to get to doubling without Lin? No, right?
You could maybe make it work, but notably the difference between their speed isn't actually that big. Going back to that 10 and 20 comparison again, he has 3 extra speed at the cost of 1 build, so he has 2 more AS than her. Which is, for someone who's supposed to be fast, when he only has 2 more speed than a slow unit, it's not really a great showing. So he doesn't actually get to doubling thresholds without the same amount to Etie. She would also double.
Yeah, so it's not the difference between a fast unit and a slow unit. It's just 2 kind of mediocre speed units that need help doubling, probably.
Yeah. Alcryst is pretty much perfectly average in terms of speed, whereas Etie is a little on the slower side, but not that much.
Sometimes people bring up that Alcryst is instantly ready for promotion and that if you promote him early, he will be getting Luna sooner than you might think. But my first instinct when I hear that is, well, I don't know if I have a spare Master Seal for him, because you get like 2 or 3 reasonably early, and almost everyone wants one. Like, I remember really being hurting for Master Seals at the point where Alcryst joins. So, do you think that might distort perceptions of how good Alcryst is?
So, yeah, they both need a Master Seal, obviously. And it's 3 early Master Seals, I believe. And if you're playing, like, strictly optimally, neither of them are getting a Master Seal, right? You're throwing your Master Seals on probably, like, Alir and Chloe and one other good unit. And then neither of them are getting the promotion in that case. So it doesn't really matter that Alcryst is already ready for it, because it would already be a bit of favoritism to promote either of them. So if we're so committed to either that we're willing to promote them, I don't see what the, extra couple levels that Etie needs really makes a difference. Especially because she does have better availability than him. Like, a lot of people have brought up that Alcryst has better bases, but, like, of course he does. If he didn't have better bases, there would be zero discussion. He's a unit who joins later.
Yeah, that's definitely... I definitely saw more Alcryst joins ready to go, like better bases, however you want to put it, ready to promote, all those kinds of nomers. But very few people brought up that Etie just exists for longer and helps you for longer. That's what we brought up earlier. Like, Etie joins before a couple chapters where shooting down flyers is unique to her, actually. Like, no one else can do it as well as she can. And she still performs, like, she still chips enemies down in the early game. So I personally feel that Etie's availability is a boon, and the fact that she needs levels to get to level 10 is kind of whatever to me. I feel like if you used Etie just as chip and occasionally kill something you have to kill, she might not make it to level 10, but she'll probably get close. I don't think the XP cost is really all that big, especially because in the previous episodes we talked about Alfred needing early game XP, And I think you said something along the lines of you have more experience and more experience boosting resources like Micaiah and Marth emblems, then you probably have units to train, right? So is Etie's early game experience really a cost to her?
Yeah, I don't think it is actually that big of a deal. Like, there's better candidates to give those resources to than her, for sure. Because notably, she is pretty bad at using the Mercurius. But that's equally true for Alcryst. And so, like, you have these resources to give to Etie. You can do that. You could give them to Alcryst too, but he has less time to use them because he joined later. And notably, if you are just going to say, well, I'm not willing to give any resources to either of them, and I'm just going to use the best unit, then sure, you'll use Etie for what? Chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and probably a paralogue. So like 5 chapters of Etie usage with no resources. She probably won't get to level 10. She'll maybe get a level or 2, which will tie her strength base with Alcryst. And then you'll, okay, Alcryst has better bases than other stats, and you switch to him, and then you'll use him for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, another 5 chapters. And then Fogato will join and you'll ditch both of them. So even in the scenario we want to emphasize Alchryst's like lack of need of resources the most, where we're just not willing to give anything.
Yeah, they're just flunkies at that point, right?
Yeah, and they're flunkies for the same amount of time. Has all of these early chapters to be a flunky before she gets benched. And then Alcryst gets benched once Fogato joins, because he's better than both of them.
Yeah. I also feel like that even that scenario is slightly painted in favor of Alcryst, because Etie could also be a reasonable flunky to deploy when Alcryst is there, because I think there's enough work for both of them in some of the Brodia chapters. Don't you agree? Like,
yeah,
there's
for
flyers
sure.
everywhere.
Especially now that you get a steel bow from the update, so you do have 2 steel bows, so they'll both have something to shoot down. So it's like 5 chapters of Etie being the better one, and then 5 chapters of using both of them. So it's like, yeah, she's just kind of better even at that like minimum amount of resources that you want to get.
Yeah, I think we've sufficiently compared the two, but it's probably worth going back to what you just said about Fogato joining and kind of outclassing the both of them, and neither of them being quote-unquote good or optimal or easy to use or whatever. So obviously it's easy to keep up with the XP requirement for staying relevant, as we've kind of established. So why are they worse than like the units you get later? Why is it optimal to use them both as plunkies, basically? Why do we bench them at all?
Like you said, there's plenty of EXP, so it's not really a huge deal that wasting EXP. But then once we get to Solm, we get Fogato and Panette, who do both of their sort of gimmick way of fighting. Like we've brought up, okay, Alcryst is the faster one, but he's only actually average feeds. Fogato is actually really fast. And if you want to, you can still give him a Luna-esque effect via the Erica bracelet, and then you can get that same effect Alcryst gets, where you double or quad an enemy while ignoring their defense, but he can do it every time with Erica. And then if you want this sort of massive strength that Etie has that you would need to boost speed, well then you get Panette, who can go Warrior and just be stronger than Etie. So you get 2 archers back to back who do the things that these 2 do, but better.
Yeah. Does it also maybe hurt these units that they are not as capable of making use of, say, the Radiant Bow? Because, like, Etie is all about her strength, not really her magic. Whereas Fogato could just go, okay, Radiant Bow, I just won around half the game now.
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage Fogato has. That's sort of just like the icing on the cake for him, of just like, okay, not only do I quad enemies and ignore their defense better than Alcryst, I also have a primary weapon that's better than his silver bow. So it's just a pretty big gap between them and the actually like very good archers, to the point where they're probably both going to be flunkies, and Etie is a flunky for longer.
Yeah, in an optimal playthrough, again, because they are also both like very usable, right? They're not so terrible that they're completely garbo.
They're both totally sufficient to like kill enemies and actually like clear chapter objectives. And so if you do want to invest in them and use them long term, they'll both work fine. But Etie will just work a little better.
Fair enough. And last time we compared Alfred to Alcryst, and we were pretty sold on just having. I was pretty sold on your explanation of Alfred being better. And we talked a little bit about how Alfred could be kind of matched by Goldmary joining late, basically doing the same thing, except Goldmary required no investment but isn't around for as much. So my last question, I guess, would be: is there a unit like these two that joins kind of late that can do their similar thing? That's like roughly as good?
I don't think there's. I think anyone who's late joining and doing their job is going to be better than them, like I mentioned with Fogato and Panette. Once you start getting later than that, like people talk about how good the pre-promotes are as you go through the game, but once you get out of Solm, they kind of dip in quality. Like Saphir is not functioning as well as Etie would, or even as well as Alcryst would. And then you get like no one joins until like Mavier and Veiled, who are obviously doing very different things. So I don't think there's anyone really super comparable to these two as the game goes on, aside from the aforementioned units who just outclassed.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that Alcryst and Etie are maybe better than some of these pre-promotes? Like, I don't know, Linden, Saphir, those kind of people?
I think it depends on your way of looking at things. I don't know how you'd exactly compare that, but I would definitely consider Etie, at least for sure, better than like those late game pre-promotes, because at least Etie can be trained up to become very powerful if you want to. Notably, she does have some unique advantages. She's the only warrior who has both a good strength stat and silver bow access.
Maybe it's easier to compare them to other units that need investments. I'm thinking of like other early game units like Anna and Jean. Do they compare better to them then?
Yeah, I think they're better than Anna and Jean, because like we said, if you're doing like hyper efficient and only making the optimal decisions, these two are still going to shoot flyers for like a couple chapters, whereas Anna and Jean just won't do anything. So I think that automatically makes them sort of better than the like trainee units of the game, because at least they have something to do, even if they aren't being invested in, whereas Jean just doesn't. That said, I don't think either of them ever reached the heights that those two units quite do, because once again, just physical units in this game really are fighting an uphill battle compared to magical ones. So the magical trainees with a ton of investment would be better, but I don't think that's really what makes them better compared to 5 chapters of shooting down Tegasai.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for sketching their place in the engaged meta. Very enlightening. I'm out of questions. Is there anything that we forgot to discuss that you think we should add here to make sure?
I can't think of anything. Yeah.
All right, good. In that case, we're done here. Let me know in the comments how far you got into the video before you typed your comments about Alcryst being better, or let me know how you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and Septi, thanks for joining, and thanks for your time.
Yep, thanks for having me on.
Bye.